Okay, so this is the second episode that I'm recording today. Welcome back to another episode of Critical Weight Theory, where sometimes I put us at a cultural crossroads, or I suppose I note that we're already at one. But anyway, we're going to explore how our cultural backgrounds shape our behaviors, values, and the way that we navigate the world, or I suppose the myriad ways that we do so. So, we'll be diving into the fascinating topic of executive functions, or those mental processes that help us manage thoughts, actions, and emotions, and how they vary across cultures, and how we, to some degree, have little mini individualized cultures. A person can be a little bit of I guess, a counterculture of one if they just do things a little bit differently. So, we'll be touching on how these differences reflect deeper societal values, particularly in the context of Western society. I could, speculate about how other countries do things. I mean, I'm going to mention Japan at one point briefly here, but for the most part, I'm talking about American experiences. So let's start with the concept of executive functions. These are the mental skills we use every day, like self control, decision making, and working memory. And they're a big part of how we go about life, like possibly the main part. They help us juggle tasks, solve problems, and manage stress, all of that stuff. But here's the interesting part: not all cultures approach these functions in the same way. In fact, executive functions can differ quite dramatically across societies and from individual to individual, and these differences reflect the broader values of those cultures and what I call mini cultures. So, cultural influences on executive functions are a huge part of life. Consider, for example, what I'll call the average hardworking American contrasted with what I will call the practical, somewhat non-conforming individual. At first glance, you know, these two people who I admittedly am kind of making up, but who actually also kind of exist. But they might seem similar in their work habits. But dig a little deeper, and the differences are clear. Hardworking Americans are often juggling multiple roles, working full time while pursuing higher education, perhaps. Maybe they're managing a lot of personal and professional goals all at once. Their lives, they might seem orderly, but they can actually be pretty chaotic. And often that's why a lot of these people in the so called professional class, or whatever you want to call them, the workaholic types, they will go to therapy and, you know, seek professional help to sort of create balance in their life. So it's not my intent to make fun of people who go to therapy, at least, not particularly that much, but you know, it's a notable thing. It's almost a badge of honor to be busy in a lot of cases, and that's, why a lot of people have these therapy bills, because American culture, like other cultures out there, will really just encourage people to be working, 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 making that dollar bill, at every opportunity that they can. By contrast, in the practical, somewhat non conforming individual, they might still do some hard work. In fact, they might sometimes border on being overworked or workaholics, but there's a more defined separation between work and personal development and a sense of personal well being and achievement. And they'll have a focus on mastery and dedication to one task at a time instead of, trying to wear all these different hats. They might not base their lives solely around making money. These differences shape how each individualized culture approaches productivity, success, and personal growth. So, why is this important? Well, it reflects broader social structures and values. In the US, individualism and self reliance are core cultural values, right? People are encouraged to largely go it alone and take control of their own destinies, like the rugged individual Marlboro man type, and it can create a fast paced, multitasking society rather than, like the cool John Wayne type or whatever, who's like, the rugged individual. It's often, somebody who's like all burnt out and, just sort of bitter about things. Not always, but definitely sometimes. And in contrast, the practical, somewhat non-conforming individual, they might place a higher value on harmony, both within oneself and with others. Again, they're probably not as hardworking, at least not most of the time, and they don't necessarily strive to be hardworking. This emphasis on balance often leads to more focused, methodical approaches to work and personal life that are less stressful and potentially less likely to go off the rails. And let's face it, sometimes they might not be that methodical at all, although, most people are to some degree. At the same time, in order for the practical, somewhat non conforming individual to succeed, they need the opportunity to succeed just like anybody else. That's why, in my view, some fanatical right wing interests out there want to choke off such characteristics and make it so everyone is fanatically devoted to working more and working more for less, because people who don't emphasize earning money as the be all end all of human existence are considered lazy and bad and are demonized to no end, right? So, it's like an all-consuming culture that you have to make money, you have to, constantly, you know you got to be the one who dies with the most toys, that sort of thing. And they some people, they don't want any alternatives to that, so it comes down to education, economy, and mental health as well. So let's talk about education and economic outcomes. In both the US and Japan, education plays a key role in shaping executive functions and, by extension, the economy. However, their approaches to education vary significantly, or so I've been told. Japan consistently ranks higher in terms of educational attainment and has one of the most rigorous academic systems in the world. This high achievement level has a direct impact on the country's economic productivity, but it also comes at a cost. They have a lot of mental health concerns over in Japan, and there are persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. And at least that's been documented among students due to the immense pressure to succeed. So in some ways they are comparable to the US in terms of the stress, because from what I recall, the United States is quite different from the country of Finland, which has a higher happiness index. Is index even the right word? I'm not sure. But anyway, in the US, the approach to education is, in some cases, more varied, with opportunities to pursue higher education while working or managing family life. But some of us still do not feel an overbearing pressure to make money literally at every opportunity. And as I mentioned before, some people want to change that. They want it. They want it to be, sort of ironically, more like Japan, but with the government providing less opportunities in many ways. You know, it's they want to privatize society basically, and some are out to change. All of these somewhat more easygoing, relatively non-conforming people by making sure literally every aspect of human life is about attaining dollars. Chasing money. So, ironically, to some degree, this nagging pressure takes advantage of America's cultural flexibility by pitting the supposed harder working people against those who do at least marginally less work. If you're not working quite as hard, you're just not as good. Maybe you're even a scumbag, according to some of these standards. A lazy, good for nothing type. So while flexibility promotes independence, it can also lead to disparities in educational outcomes and economic stability and a difference in attitudes, which opens the door to scapegoating when it comes to inequality. Blame immigrants, even if they're actually here illegally, as we found out with, the whole thing in Springfield. Most of those Haitians are actually here legally. Maybe even all of them are. The vast majority of them are here illegally, yet they're still being scapegoated. What a curious thing, you know? It used to be that they would try to have the messaging to be solely against, or at least mostly against, the illegal immigrants, as they call them. But now it's like the mask has just totally been slipped to the ground, and they're just admitting that it's because they're immigrants. They're different in some way. So who the hell needs them? That's the attitude. There's a lot of Nazi-esque messaging involved in that, and the claim that they're eating dogs and cats and whatever else now. Really, that actually has some specific origins. In this case, with a neo-Nazi group called Blood Tribe, I believe. But it's also sort of an age-old trope anyway, with the idea that certain immigrants, are eating cats or dogs. Although it's it's also part of the message that they're trying to claim that immigrants are making society dirtier. They're spreading disease. Like that's what these Nazis are trying to you know create this paranoid atmosphere about. And at the end of the day, that's all really a part of this idea that even if people are hardworking, they're still not hardworking enough. Even if they're here legally, they're still not here legally enough. We'll just call them illegal anyway. That's really what's going on there. And unfortunately, the consequences of these, in many cases, slight productive cultural differences between Americans who are working ultra hard, and maybe those who work a little bit less hard. But those differences ripple into broader societal issues, including inequality, labor productivity, racism, as I just mentioned, and even environmental sustainability as a topic. So maybe you work a little bit less because you believe the economy is environmentally, maybe even socially unsustainable as is. So, you're concerned about the environment, you're concerned about social cohesion and all that kind of stuff. Well, that would have you to the left of center, and certain people will hate your guts for that, even if your view seems perfectly normal enough to you and is based at least partially on evidence, even personal experience. None of that matters to the narrative of you either work harder for less or you're trash. And the related narratives about how you're dragging society down in this way or that way, or you're a part of this trend that's dragging people down. The point is, they gotta crack that whip, and you better get up and dance when they do, or maybe they will crack it a little harder next time, you know? And hey, maybe if they focus their anger at some other group instead, they will be less likely to crack that whip at you. So maybe you'll start spreading their narratives too, thinking, hey, now I'm part of their club. Who knows? Maybe they'll give me one of their fancy whips and I'll crack it hard myself against this group or that I don't happen to like. And maybe they will hand you that whip after all. And damn, maybe maybe you'll like cracking that whip more than you thought. And they'll be like, go ahead and give it a try. And you'll be like, okay, now I feel like I'm Indiana Jones or something, and life is like an adventure, and I'm, you know, teaching the teaching the bad guys in society a lesson by saying, hey, you got to work harder, you know. So it, a lot of that comes down to cultural norms and ethical beliefs, and you know, that's that's really what that is. I mean, it's weird to even apply the term ethics to that, but it is a type of ethical belief. So let's shift gears a little bit now to explore how cultural background shapes ethical beliefs. Every culture has its own set of norms, deeply ingrained behaviors that dictate what is considered right or wrong. For example, in more collectivist cultures, the well being of the community often takes precedence over individual gain, and some people don't want that. In these societies, ethical beliefs are heavily influenced by a sense of duty to the group more than to, the individual, or especially a select class of individuals. By contrast, individualistic cultures, such as those in the West, often emphasize personal freedom and self reliance, but paradoxically, it can actually be at the expense of personal freedom and self reliance. And this difference in values extends to how people view morality, justice, and fairness. So, one major factor that contributes to these ethical frameworks is religion. Across cultures, religious beliefs provide the moral foundation for many of our ethical decisions, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, or Hinduism. Religious doctrines often outline principles of good conduct, charity, truth, and justice, which shape an individual's moral compass. For example, in Christianity, teachings like love your enemy promote forgiveness and compassion, while in Hinduism, the concept of karma emphasizes the importance of moral actions in determining one's future. But then you also have these right wing religious groups, and they're like another beast altogether. I could get more into that, but this episode's probably long enough already. But just, it all ties into some of the things that I've already said. Socialization, family, and historical context are all important aspects of which avenues we ultimately go down in life. So, family plays a crucial role in shaping an individual's ethical beliefs, obviously. Parents, elders, community leaders all pass down cultural values and ethical principles, instilling a sense of right and wrong from an early age. And some people accept those stated values, whatever they are, they'll just accept it, whatever comes down the pike. So these values can be further reinforced by historical events and political systems. You know, certain specific events might scramble a person's circuits. For example, societies with a history of conflict or colonization may come to emphasize justice and resistance to oppression, or they might go down a darkened path because of that. And cultures rooted in democratic ideals might prioritize individual rights and liberties. Or, if they're not around such ideals, they might totally squander those things. And you can have a society that's free internally, yet externally treats other societies like crap. Language also plays a key role in how we understand ethics. The way a culture talks about moral concepts, whether emphasizing harmony, autonomy, or responsibility, can influence how individuals make decisions in ethical dilemmas. So, how do these cultural values tie back to executive functions? Cultures that prioritize community over individual gain may exhibit higher levels of executive function in the form of cooperation and long term planning. In contrast, societies that encourage consumption and individual achievement, to a ridiculous degree often foster a more fragmented approach to decision making, where immediate rewards are valued over communal well being, and where individuals may suffer anyway, which should not be overlooked. Interestingly, despite globalization and the blending of cultures, research shows that national identities actually remain strong, even in the face of increased competition and economic interdependence. Cultural traditions continue to shape behavior, values, and yes, executive functions in a surprisingly traditional way, for lack of a better word. So, that's the role of culture in shaping our lives. And it's one of the reasons why, as they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So, culture plays an enormous role in shaping how we think, act, and navigate life, whether it's through education, religious beliefs, so called family values, or social norms. The cultural background we come from has a profound influence on our executive functions, our ethical beliefs, and priorities. Understanding how these differences exist can help us appreciate the diversity of human experience and hopefully lead to more compassionate and cooperative societies, which actually respects individual differences. And, well, that about wraps it up for this episode. I'd like to thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review if you enjoyed today's discussion. I don't know why I said us, it's just me here. But, well, until next time, stay curious and don't crack that whip too hard.